So, to all of our listeners today, we're talking to entrepreneurs specifically, and we want to address some smart strategies for how to build wealth, how to preserve wealth, how to utilize and harness your strength as an entrepreneur for your financial benefit over the long term. So, we've got lots of different ideas to talk about today. Where should we begin?
Well, I think there's a great idea of what I think is the default. An entrepreneur says, I'm going to grow my business, I'm going to build it, I'm going to invest in it, and I'm going to sell it someday, and I'll sail off into the sunset.
Right.
And I think that some people might have that default. I think a lot of people do. But some of the negatives we see with that is, one, all their eggs are in one basket, and they're perpetually in one basket, even as they're aging, even as they're growing. And then the second being, in order to sail off into that sunset, you've got to sell your business. And some people aren't that excited when they get there. They're in their 50s and 60s, and they say, I really love what I do. I've never been better at what I do. But now in order to actually retire or have the kind of income I want, I have to sell it. So what we're talking about a little bit today is, how do you, in the midst of building a business and focusing all your time and effort into that, how do you still diversify your personal finances? How do you still build your financial future? There's some great strategies. So I think jumping in a little bit, I think that's the baseline.
Yeah, I think that most entrepreneurs from the very onset, they don't measure risk and opportunity the same way. They see their opportunity, they got eyes wide open, they see all the things that they can do, and they don't evaluate the risk that's in front of them. I think clearly one of the key things for every entrepreneur is to sit down and assess what your plan is, and building a plan is really important. And again, it's true that every entrepreneur is going to put all of his energy, his money, his time into his business at first. But long term, you need to have a plan to diversify from that, right?
Yeah, and let's talk about too, not just an entrepreneur that is a one-hit wonder, right? Has poured all their time and energy into building one company. We work with entrepreneurs who are serial entrepreneurs, right? They might have had an exit event and now they're just looking for the next best opportunity. They may have had one success and one failed business, and they're interested in diversifying the different types of businesses that they own, right? So I don't want to just assume that the entrepreneur that we're speaking to has put all their time and energy into one company. Sometimes the entrepreneurial mindset, they arrive at multiple companies. They leave one company ready to bounce to the next company. So in the midst of their appetite for growth, right, they have a tendency to be people that are willing to take on more risk. In fact, they're thrilled by the new opportunity. So when they want to stop and think about how their business self shows up for their personal self when it comes to finances, right? What are some of the strategies to make sure they harness that desire and that appetite for greater risk and greater growth? How do they harness that for their long-term financial benefit, right?
I love it. Well, let's start with a little bit of low-hanging fruit. The first one I would say is real estate. I had a client not that long ago that they had built a business, entrepreneur, and they'd bought the building that they were operating out of. And I think they'd moved a couple of times, but owned the building, held it in a separate LLC. And it came time that they were looking to retire. The building itself that they had now paid off was actually more valuable than the operating business that they had.
Wow.
It was just an odd moment where he's like, I'm going to actually sell this to my employees. There's a few of them who were ready to take over. He didn't want this huge price. He wanted something they can afford. So he sold it for, I think, a discount, but sold it at a reasonable price to his employees. But he remained the landlord. And now he just collects rent every month, and he still has this really large asset in this large warehouse that he has. And so for him, he was not only building the business, but he was using the income from the business to fund this building. So he diversified a little bit of his holdings, and he got some tax benefits along the way. When he bought that building, he started having depreciation. He could write off some of the interest. There's a number of benefits. So I think the low-hanging fruit is, as your business starts to thrive, if you can buy your own building, if you can buy your own space, one, you control it, but two, it's really good to diversify your investments. And free legal comment, your business the operating business shouldn't legally own the building. It should be a separate LLC, own it personally. I think we did another episode on that structure, but even though the business is funding it, you should still own it through a separate LLC to give you maximum flexibility in the future.
Let's talk about some other low-hanging fruit, which is retirement plans, right? As the employer, you can utilize that to your benefit. And so depending on the structure of your business, the number of employees, right, there are some specific rules governed by ERISA that talk about how and when contributions need to be made so that it's fairly distributed. However, all that being said, that's the disclaimer. There are retirement plans and structures that the employer can benefit from, not only maxing out the employee side of retirement contributions on an annual basis, but in addition, the employer side on top of that. And so when we talk about taxes, right, and we talk about the flow through entities that a lot of our entrepreneurs own, it is really hard to start to come up with some tax strategies where you can minimize your tax burden, right? You're exposed. All the
Right.
income is exposed. And so having a retirement plan that works for you and maximizes that as a lever that you can utilize even at the end of the year, right? So you go throughout your year, you maybe don't have to pre-fund that plan. It might be more than likely in November and December, you take a look, you get some tax estimates, and you utilize that retirement plan to your benefit to minimize your tax liability. But as financial planners, we like to see that added benefit for your future. So when you're tired of being an entrepreneur or when you're ready for that big sale at the end of your life, you've still got a retirement plan in place. So that's kind of, for me, two birds in one stone.
Yeah, and the caution I would say here is that most employers don't want to contribute a large amount of money to their employees. And again, there's different plans and different strategies that will benefit the maximum benefit to you as an employer and still give your employees a great deal of benefit. And you just have to segment, and there's a lot of different plans. I don't think we want to go through all the different plans that are available to like a sole proprietor versus a partnership versus a corporation. It just depends on the kind of company and depends on your cash flow. We encourage employers to benefit their long-term standing employees. We feel like it's the right thing to do. And it is something that I think that all of us as employers, we say, well, I don't have the money to do that. Well, if you start looking at replacing employees, if you have high turnover, the cost can be enormous to a company to do that. So one of the ways that creates stickiness is to make sure you benefit your employees, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And
And let's just talk about two broad buckets, because I totally agree. We don't need to go through the laundry list of different retirement plan structures that are available. That's what we do. If you have questions, come in and talk to us. But there's two really broad buckets of retirement plans, which is defined contribution and defined benefit plans.
Right.
And defined contribution plans in general offer more flexibility to the employer about how and when they fund it. Defined benefit plans have an added layer of oversight, of requirements of when and how and commitment. So if you have a really steady income stream, right, a defined benefit plan might be the right choice for you. However, most employers are shifting away from defined benefit plans, right? Defined contribution offers a lot more flexibility for the employer in general. I don't know, you guys might have something to add to that, but
that's great. I think just some of the ballparks I would throw out there. If someone's looking to put away 20 grand a year, that's what they're thinking. That's a real simple plan, not a concern. If someone said, as an entrepreneur, I want to try and get away, maybe $70,000 a year. Maybe me and my spouse, we both work in the business, 140 between the two of us, we'd like to put away. Also pretty easy. As plans move forward up the kind of complexity line, if someone said, I need to get $200,000 to $300,000 into my retirement plan, I have the cash flow and I really want to do it. There's a few situations where those plans exist, and they're not for everybody. They don't work in all situations, but there's a whole scale of how much money we're talking here needs to go in. And we often talk about with retirement savings, it's not a one shot, I'm just going to throw a bunch of money in there. It's slow and over time. And so the earlier you start these, the earlier as a business owner you start making these good choices, the less painful it is. And I agree with your comment highly, Randy, of if you have good long-term employees, rewarding them and paying them not just through cash, through their payroll, but offering some of these benefits so that they and you get this tax benefit is really powerful way to retain and build up some of your best employees.
And the different kinds of plans, I mean, again, that's where we come alongside of our clients, the business owner, and develop a plan that fits for their economics. In other words, some companies don't get paid on a steady stream. It is a product sale, so it comes at different times of the year. And there's different retirement plans that will fit well in line with that kind of structure. Other companies have been well established. They have a good steady cash flow. Their debt levels are well below the what I call the concern on a monthly basis, so they can become more consistent with the kind of retirement plans that they put in. And that's creating another bucket, right, for future use. And that to me is just wise to have a broad diversification of your economics.
Yeah. The next thing I want to talk about is I want to go back to what Jeremiah, when he started describing an entrepreneur. And he said, for those who have an entrepreneurial mindset, oftentimes when they get onto a new idea or a new business opportunity, they are all in. And so everything kind of falls away. They're focused on this one opportunity and they put all their eggs in one basket. And as those entrepreneurs progress in their career, they might shift from one business opportunity to the next business opportunity, but the mindset is similar in that I'm going to put myself all in to this opportunity to see how far I can drive it. And as a planner, right, when we're looking at the overall lifespan and how we want these finances to last your entire life, right, one of the things in the songs that we sing a lot is diversification. And a lot of times when people think about diversification, we're just thinking about your investment portfolio and the difference between equities and bonds or equity and fixed income, right? But when we look at a holistic financial plan for somebody, we're looking at diversification of your overall assets. So the business and owning a business is one of your assets. But if like Jeremiah talked about, the investment in commercial real estate might be a next great opportunity for you, where eventually that could turn into a passive income stream for yourself. Some people take that and want to have other real estate holdings in the residential space and how that might benefit. In addition to, we've got the retirement plan that we've talked about. In addition to, what do we need our investment accounts to be doing for us, right? So diversification has multiple layers. And for the entrepreneur, I think a lot of times the strength that they have is that they become hyper-focused on what's in front of them to drive it as far as they can, right? And so this is where the benefit of having a team behind you to say, this is great, be all in, but we're still keeping an eye on the broader sense of diversification. How are you spreading out your wealth across multiple sources of income?
Yeah, and again, for those companies that do have profit, I mean, when you're first starting out, a lot of times the expenses overcomes your profit. So you're kind of working on razor thin cash flows. But as obviously the goal is not to live in that particular state for very long. You want to be able to bust out of it. I always encourage, particularly brand new entrepreneurs, be patient, build up your cash, be capable, and don't start putting all your money into retirement plans, because remember, when you cross over that line, that money can't come back without penalty. So you have to be very careful about the money and how you do it. That's why the tax code allows us to file extensions. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, we can push out the actual deposit of money into those plans until, long after the end of the year, long after April. We can get into like September, October in some cases. So again, we ought to be cautious about this. And again, reduction of taxes and cash flow, they all kind of come together, right?
Mm-hmm. Cash flow. So glad you said cash flow for the entrepreneur. Cash is king, man. Exactly. When you want to be ready for that next opportunity, cash is huge.
Right. And I think there's even some seasonality that we're I think naturally just kind of talking about, like you said, Rand, there's some startups who you're not thinking about any of this stuff, right? You're just trying to make payroll. You're trying to, get product out the door. You're trying to provide services. But as someone goes on that entrepreneurial journey, right, there becomes moments where they start realizing, hey, I can start building my future here. And I think that's really the crux of what we're trying to talk about today is thinking a little bit ahead, not just where are you today, but what comes next. And what I love is when we can create with clients kind of some way markers or some, am I on track? Because if you're an entrepreneur and say, hey, if in a year I'm here, well, that means I should start thinking about buying a building. If in 2 years I'm here, I should start thinking about retirement. If by 5 years I've made it to this point, well, wow, I should be doing all these things to build their future. And I think there's some real value in not just saying more sales, more taxes, more sales, more taxes, but to say, as I have more sales, how do I best utilize and strategize this money to kind of be lined up? So,
and I go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just saying, I think this is where when we sit down with a brand new person, once they get their feet off, so to speak, their blast off, they need to build a council around them. We can help them with the investment side of it and the retirement planning, but also, Jeremiah, you bring in the legal side of it. And oftentimes people say, well, I'll just deal with that later. But then that plus the tax, this is ongoing counsel that people need to have this information or make good choices. They could be right in the middle of a contract, a buy or a sell, and they don't have a good attorney that comes alongside of them to help them make the best decisions about that
Yeah.
transaction.
This tees up the next topic I was thinking about, which is how do we structure the company in such a way, whether you have multiple partners, whether you're a solo entrepreneur, solo owner, business owner, right? Like structuring the partnership in such a way that there is an exit already planned, even if you intend to keep the business for your entire working life or career, right? Having that mapped out ahead of time. I can't tell you how often we meet with partners that are in the middle of a disagreement, and it is elongated and it takes a long time to come to an ends that both parties are amicable to, and it essentially puts a burden on the business, right? The growth of the company. So as an entrepreneur, when you're at the beginning, I want to emphasize, how do we structure the business, the operations, and the plan moving forward in such a way that it's clear? I like to say clear is kind. Like, let's be clear. And yes, that means having some uncomfortable conversations right at the beginning, but think about how that could benefit yourself in the future. And so I think a lot about just kind of the time. And this is hard for entrepreneurs because when they get onto a new idea and a new opportunity, time is of the essence and everything is urgent. And being thoughtful about not just how you structure your business, how you structure your partnership, but thirdly, how you structure your lending. Entrepreneurs are in the business of growth. And so inevitably there will be an opportunity where they want to leverage more capital into their company to get it to the next level. And a lot of times our counsel comes not just about when they need those funds, but how and where best to get those funds, and what's too much and what's an appropriate amount of risk to take for their company.
Yeah, those are great comments, and
They really are.
I think that the clear is kind. We use that a lot. They're harder conversations, but it gets some clarity. I'll just tell a quick story. Yesterday, I was on the call with two entrepreneurs, they're partners, and they've built this business, and we were actually working through a shareholder agreement. They were considering, well, what happens when this person wants to leave or that one person wants to leave? How do we do this? We're working through valuation formulas. We're trying to figure out, rights to buy and to sell, things they could have done years and years ago. They've been in this business for a long time. But they also just got a letter of intent from someone who's going to potentially buy their business. And so now they're kind of, their heads are spinning a little bit with, how do we buy from each other? How do we protect our families? Do we just want to sell the whole thing? And it's a great place to be, and they have great opportunities. But these are all items that, had they been thought about years ago, it would have been a much easier transition, an easier moment. But with that, what I see, and I think, Laura, directly to your comment, when we have someone who's on their third or fourth business, they're serial entrepreneurs, they've had an exit, they're working again, these ideas come fast. They know what they need for lending. They know what they need for retirement plans. They know they're going to need to buy a building. It's really exciting to see when these are brand new. And like you said, Laura, it feels so almost aspirational. I'm just trying to, sell product and grow. But someone who's done this 2 or 3 times, they realize, yeah, the growth is coming. We need to be sustainable. We need to take care of our taxes. We need to take care of our planning. And I love it when, someone comes in and says, okay, I think I need an S Corp, and I think I need this, and I think I need, and they're open to discussion and they're open to advice, but they already have some insights that they're going to need a retirement plan. They're going to need this because they've been through this once or twice before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, a little bit of the wisdom for new entrepreneurs, if this is their first one, to look to people who've done this before. Like, what are they talking about when it's buying the building? What are they talking about when it's retirement plans? And are they even talking about that? And if they're not, those might not be the best group of entrepreneurs. Those might just be more the gunslingers, right, who want to make a buck and exit. But to really have these great built, lasting companies, that's that advice. That's that thought.
Well, and I want to address those who have stepped into a family business. I mean, here we are, Jeremiah and I, stepping into a family business. We have an entrepreneurial mindset. So even though we're stepping into something that has existed and being built before us, we have the opportunity to grow it into a new phase of its operation. And so oftentimes we meet with entrepreneurs that have, they call it like a generation 1 mindset, right? They come into something that's pre-existing, right, but they're looking to change it up and grow it into its future. And this is a hard moment to stop and think about what they see the future to become. Right. They might assume, just as the previous generation, hey, maybe I could pass this on to a family member. This is what it always has been. So I'm in the business of honoring who started this company, but also in the same moment, having thoughts about where do I want to take this company in my career? And what will it look like at the end of it? It could look completely different, or it could look very much the same, right? So how you structure those opportunities for your employees or for potential outside investors, right, et cetera, et cetera. So it's entrepreneurs that are oftentimes brought into family businesses that, because they maybe have a similar mindset to the generation prior to them who started the company, right? They come into something pre-existing. They still need to think about this exit plan and strategy.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, what I've seen from businesses over the decades that I've been in business is that typically you have the entrepreneur who has the passion, who drives the business, and then this next generation comes in, they manage it. And there's not that same passion to grow the business, to expand it, to drive it. And so they end up being kind of frustrated. They manage it for the benefit of the parent. And then when they get to finally the third generation saw all the exhaustion of their parent, and they're saying, we don't want to do that. So they end up selling it. So very, very few businesses last beyond 2 generations, or third generations. It's almost like 98%, they're gone.
Right.
So again, I think if you're bringing in that next generation, you have to hear from them. What do they want to do? Do they have a passion for driving the business? And the original generation, in this situation, I'll take myself, you have to be willing to listen, and you have to be willing to adapt and to grow with what's going on with the new ideas and such as that. Again, it's a balance going forward. But I see a lot of desires that are crushed because the entrepreneur who started it, who just says it's my way or no way, and that just absolutely is crushing to the new generation coming in, going, that's not what my intent is. That's not what my desire is. And again, this is a life work, so you want to make sure that the life work is a thriving, ambitious, but satisfying work. That you wake up in the morning thinking about the things that you can do to make your life better for your clients, for your employees, ultimately for, whatever that next generation is. And there has to be that enthusiasm that drives into that business. And it can't just be passed on. You're going to manage this for me, so to speak. Yeah. And then I get all the economic tail end benefits. That's not what it's about, right?
Yep. So let's recap, because I think there's been some really good nuggets in here. So for the entrepreneurial listener, we want you to know that your mindset and your skill set is a strength, and to be fully aware of the tendencies that you have to seek after an opportunity and to be very directed and focused on that one opportunity, or to be a serial entrepreneur with any new opportunity that becomes available. And our voice in this is to look at not just your business wealth, but your personal wealth, right? And how do we build both simultaneously? And so we've talked about some of those key strategies when you're thinking about structuring your company, structuring a retirement plan, thinking about broad diversification, and the exit strategy, right? So what's going to happen in the end for the company is as best as you can find. Did I miss any of the key strategies or points?
No, we got more time to go over all the issues, but I think you hit on all of them that I can think of.
Yeah, there's always more strategies in place, but that's enough for today. So thank you so much to our listeners. We hope what you heard was helpful.
Until next week, folks, may you grow in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for listening.
We have a few more things to let you know about before we go. Podcast reviews really help us to serve more people and get this information into the hands of the people who need it. Please leave us a review. Even if it's not 5 stars, we welcome the feedback.
And we invite you to let us know what topics you would like to hear more about, or what would benefit the people in your life who you're closest to. We have more resources online. Those resources are designed to help you share this great information easily with people in your life. To access those resources, please visit tricordadvisors.com.
Often we hear from clients that they wish they had talked to us sooner. If that's you, we'd be thrilled to see how financial planning can benefit your life. Email us at contact@tricordadvisors.com, or simply click on the link in the show notes.
This show was produced by Graham Gardner at Model FA. Find out more about how to create a podcast for your financial planning business by visiting modelfa.com. We love creating content that's useful, resourceful, and maybe even a little entertaining. We want to make this mega universe of financial topics and advice applicable and helpful to your life.
Remember, at Tricord Advisors, we are your future's best ally.